Few days ago, I posted a poll on what video you want me to make next on AWS, and most of you suggested Spring Cloud AWS with SQS and ElastiCache. In this video, we are going to look at Spring Cloud AWS using SQS and ElastiCache with Redis as the caching implementation. Let's get started.
Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss any update from Tech Primers.
Initially, we are going to look at the architecture diagram on what we are going to deploy and how we are going to integrate SQS and ElastiCache within our architecture. After that, we will directly jump into the hands-on and we will try them out in the AWS environment. I'm going to use AWS EC2 instance to deploy our Spring Cloud AWS application, which is based on Spring Boot. I'll be connecting this particular service to an SQS service to send a message to the SQS service within Amazon. SQS, if you're not aware, is a simple queue service which you can leverage for point-to-point communication. As the logo denotes, you can publish a message and you can consume a message as a receiver. So we are going to consume the same message from the SQS topic and then just log it initially. So this is the first part of the video. I'll be doing this separately and then we'll deploy in the AWS environment and then we'll see how we are getting the message. Once this is completed, we're going to integrate the caching layer. So we are going to store the message into the ElastiCache. Instead of directly storing it into a database, I'm just showing you how you can store it in an ElastiCache instance. If you had remember, I had done a video on Spring Data Redis. We're going to leverage the same kind of implementation in this example as well because we already are using Spring Boot. All this is triggered based on a post request for a user endpoint which I'm going to expose from the Amazon EC2 instance. Also, I'm going to use a get request to pull the data from that Redis cache to show that okay, this cache has been updated. Every resource within this architecture or every service within this architecture will have a corresponding role, and we need some permissions in order to these services to communicate with each other. For example, the EC2 instance needs a specific role to connect to the SQS topic. Same way, we need to have a specific role or permission to connect to the ElastiCache instance. All these will be configured as a part of the same video as well. So I'll be showing you how I'm going to use these policies to update my existing roles to get permission to update or query SQS or Redis cache. With that, let's jump into the hands-on part. Like always, I'm going to start with start.spring.io. I'm going to create an application with a group ID com tech primers. I'm just going to call this as Spring Cloud AWS example 1. So I'm just going to remove the package name to be com tech primers. I'm going to use Java 11. Also, I'm going to use the version 2.3.9 version of Spring Boot. I don't want to try the latest version yet, so I'm going to use 2.3.9. The dependencies which I require are the Spring Web dependency because I'm going to expose an endpoint. If you see in this architecture for exposing the endpoint, I'm going to use Spring Web, and I'm going to use some AWS specific dependencies because I'm going to integrate with AWS services. I don't have to integrate with RDS because I'm not going to leverage RDS, but I need the core and also I need the dependency for SQS, right? So I'm just going to say select SQS as well. So SQS is basically for messaging. So these are the 3 dependencies which I'm adding, and then based on our integration, for example, we need Redis and things like that, we can add it later. So I'm just going to generate the project. Let me generate this project and then open it in IntelliJ. So the project got opened, all my dependencies are getting downloaded. Since I tried the whole demo with a different version of Spring Boot, it's just downloading everything. So let's wait for the import to complete. So the project got loaded. Let me open the project. It's a plain vanilla project. There's nothing going to be there. So in order to create all our resources, I'm just going to create different packages. I'm just going to say controller as one package. I'll also create one for model, one for service. So let me create the controller. So I'm going to call this particular controller as user controller, my traditional user class which I used to create. Nothing fancy here. This is not a production grade application, so don't just follow blindly. So I'm just going to call request mapping, and I'm going to expose an endpoint called /user. And I'm going to add a post mapping because I want to create a particular uh, user, right? And this is going to be a part of the request body, and user is the model which I want to create. Let me create that in a bit. I'm going to create it under the model class. I'm going to implement serializable because I'm going to publish it into the SQS topic. SQS topic needs a serializable object, so I'm going to implement serializable. I'm just going to create private string name. I also need the ID. I'll also add a string parameter for salary just for the namesake. I also need the private static final long. I'll just create some version. So I just created equals to string hash code, all my getter setters, variables, etc. Right, which is the default stuff. Obviously, I can use Lombok. I'm just not using it here right now. So let me import. Okay, so this is imported because by default it's in the same project. So let me create, and then we can add a log statement creating user. So what I need to do is I'm going to publish this. So I'm just going to return true here, true or false, right? Because I want to publish a message if this particular user was sent to a queue or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SQS sender service. I'm just going to create it because it doesn't exist. So let me create this particular class in the service package. I'm going to annotate it with this service annotation, and we are done. I'm going to auto wire this. So as a part of the service, I'm just going to send the message, right? I'm just going to send this particular user. That's all I want to do. So I'm just creating a method called send with the user as the message. So let me create this. So the return type, I'm just going to have it as void. I don't want to return anything. I'm just going to say user. Now, in order to send the message, we need to create something called queue messaging template. So similar to how we create REST templates, Redis templates inside Spring Boot, there is something called queue messaging template. So I'm just going to create a queue messaging template. So this is the class. I want to auto inject it, but I want to inject the Amazon SQS asynchronous class into that particular queue messaging template. So queue messaging template is used for any interactions with any type of queue. Here I'm going to use Amazon SQS. So for that purpose, I'm just going to create and inject a Amazon SQS asynchronous topic. So I'm just going to create a constructor, and I'm just going to, instead of injecting this whole template, I'm just going to inject the Amazon SQS async interface, right? So this is going to create a implementation of the Amazon SQS and then inject it into the um, queue messaging template. So I'm just going to pass that particular implementation here. So instead of auto wiring it, I'm just going to inject the Amazon SQS async. So this way, this template will be now plugged onto the Amazon SQS topic by default. So I'm going to send the message into this. So I'm just saying queue messaging template dot, there is something called convert and send. I'm just going to use that, and I need to send it to a particular SQS topic, right? I mean, I'm just going to create a new SQS topic which I'm going to call as user cache details, because I'm going to use this particular queue to interact and then update my cache, right? So I'm just calling it as user hyphen cache hyphen details, and I'm just going to say what message I want to push. That's it. So I'm just going to convert this user JSON message or user model into a message which SQS understand, and that's why I'm doing convert and send. I'm not going to convert into a format which Amazon understands. So I'm just going to leverage queue messaging template to do it as a part of convert and send and this implementation, and I'm going to send it to this particular topic. So I have not created this topic yet. Let's create the topic in a bit. But that's all right. I mean, I'm just going to add some log message here just to show that okay, we're sending it. That's it. So I'm going to expose an endpoint which is post. As a part of it, we are creating a user object and then pushing it into a queue. So this aligns with our architecture diagram. If you remember, I'm just going to create a user and then push it into SQS topic. Now I need to also consume it from the SQS topic. I'm not going to create a separate EC2 instance for it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to plug that consuming part also in the same application. Just to make things simpler, I'm just going to use the same application to consume it also. So I'm going to create something called SQS receiver. So you can definitely do it in a separate microservice. Just for simplicity, I'm going to create it in the same microservice. So I'll just create SQS receiver. Again, I'm just going to call this as a service because I'm just going to leverage this bean for just receiving the message. Now, the beauty of Spring Cloud AWS comes in when you have annotation based options for listening and publishing, right? So, in the earlier publishing use case, we just leveraged the template like how we generally do within Spring. And now we are going to leverage another annotation to just retrieve the message. Spring Boot exposes something called as SQS listener, using which we can listen to a particular queue. So I'm just going to call this queue as user cache details. That's the queue name. And I'm just going to give some name to it. So I'm just going to say user cache listener. And whatever message I'm going to receive, I'm just going to enter here. So from the queue, we are going to consume the message automatically just by using this annotation. And it's just going to get the message directly to the function. I'm just going to log it saying received message for user. That's it. So I'll just receive the message into this particular method and then I'm just printing it, nothing else. So we're going to achieve this particular part here. So I'm going to publish a message and then receive the message and then store it and show it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the infrastructure setup for it. So done with the coding for now, unless we want to do the integration of cache, which will take a bit more time. But I'm going to create all the AWS resources which we require. The first thing is we need to have an EC2 instance. So I'm just going to create an EC2 instance. So let me go to EC2 service and I'm just going to create, I can do a launch instance. I already have one instance which was running, you just saw. I'm not going to leverage it. So I'm going to leverage a new EC2 instance. So I'm going to launch a new one. I'm going to leverage the T2 micro. 1 GB of memory is enough for me. So I'm just going to say review and launch. So I don't want to modify. Actually, I want to modify some. Oh, what was that? I wanted to configure the instance with a security group, right? So I'm going to create a new security group and I'm going to assign a new IAM role. So what happens is when I'm pushing the code into the EC2 instance, I'm going to push it via a S3 bucket. So this is hidden in the architecture, but how do I get my code into the EC2 instance? I'm going to push it to a S3 bucket and from there I'm going to download it. In order to do that, I need a role for it, right? So I'm just going to leverage a IAM role for my EC2 instance so that I can get access to the S3 bucket. So I already created this role called EC2 S3 role, read role. Let me open it up and show it for you. So I'm just going to the IAM console. So here I have a role called as EC2 S3 read role. And inside that, if you see, I'm just giving access to Amazon S3 read only. Ignore the ElastiCache thing for now, but understand that I'm just giving a read only access to S3 bucket. So I'm just going to give that role here, IAM role for the EC2 instance. And I'm also running it in a default VPC, right? That's it. I don't want to add anything else complicated. Let me go to, I think, security group. So in the security group, I need to have a way for my machine to access this EC2 instance, right? So I'm just going to say use my IP address. So I'm just selecting my IP address here. So I'll be able to log in from my local machine, my local terminal into this EC2 instance. So I'm just giving that permission and done. So let me log in. I already have the key pair with me, so I'm just going to use the same. So let this EC2 instance get launched. Meanwhile, we need to create the SQS topic. So I'm just going to go to SQS, Amazon SQS, just search for SQS and then you can get it. Let me open up in a new tab. Here I already have something called user details as one queue. I'm going to create a new queue, which I'm going to call it as user cache details. So this is my queue. I don't want to have a FOQ, so I'm just creating a standard queue. There is something called visibility timeout, delivery delay, and receive message wait time. So visibility timeout is when how long can the message be seen and how long should I retain my message. Like for example, this message is retained for 4 days. Visibility timeout is when within 30 seconds, if you're not able to consume the message, right? I mean, I can make that message available immediately. If my process consumes the message and it's not able to process that message in the next 30 seconds, I can make it available. So Amazon will make it available, visible for other consumers to consume, right? I mean, if it is consumed from the same topic. There is something called delivery delay, using which we can delay the message to the receiver. So I'm just going to add a delay of 5 seconds, right? This is just to make sure we get the logs. We look at the logs and we understand that, okay, this is retrieved by the same process, right? So just to show that delay, I'm just adding a 5-second delay so we can look at that. For the access policy, I'm just going to say define who can send message to the queue. So this is where I was mentioning we need to send the message to the queue right now, and we need to have a role or access policy for it. So I'm just going to select this particular option where I'm going to enter specific AWS accounts or IAM users or roles which can have access. So what I did is I created a role, or what we can do is we can create a new role. So let me go to roles, or let me go to users, right? I mean, I think I already have a user called app user. Yep. So I think we can leverage the same. So I created this user called app user. Under the app user, I have given multiple roles. So I have given a role for SQS, right? You can like ignore the other stuff. I'm just having read only role for EC2. I also have, actually, we can remove the cloud formation roles. We don't need any additional roles as such. So I've just detached that particular policy from here. So these are different policies. These are permissions. So if you remember from the architecture diagram, we added permissions. These are the permissions. So I'm giving permission for SQS to have full access, which basically means this particular user, whoever has access with this particular user, they can read and write from this particular queue. So I've created a specific user. This particular user will have a secret key. I will show that in a bit. So I'm just using the same user, and I'm giving some permission for that particular user on what he can access and what resources he can create and have read-only access to. So these are the things which he has access to, right? So I'm done with. So I want to copy this ARN. So I'm just selecting it. I will be pasting the ARN here. So only this particular user can publish the message to this particular queue. So that's what we are defining here, right? Who can send messages to the queue? Only this particular user. Who can receive the message from the queue? Only this particular user. So this way we can control who has permissions to access this particular queue. So I'm just creating a queue. Let me hit the create button. So that's it. The queue got created, and if you look at it, this is the URL of the queue, right? If you want to directly access from my API. Coming back to the EC2 instance, if you launch the EC2 instance, you can see that the EC2 instance is launched. I'm going to connect to this particular EC2 instance. Let me click here, and I'm just saying connect. I have the SSH client, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my SSH command, and let me go to the terminal here, and I'm just going to paste it. So this will SSH onto my EC2 instance, and let me go there. Done. So in this machine, by default, Java won't be there. If I say Java command not from, so I'm just going to say yum install Java. Obviously in production, don't do this. Oh, okay, you need root, so I'll just say sudo su. Obviously in production, you cannot run things as root as well. So make sure you don't do whatever I do in production. These are all just for proof of concept purposes. So let me go back to JS. Let me go back to the project. So here I'm just going to build it. Right now we did not build it. We need to build it and push it into a S3 bucket so that we can download it from the EC2 instance. So I'm just going to say clean and install. Let's do a clean and install. In the POM XML, I think we saw. Okay, so we can see that there is a AWS starter dependency. There is also AWS messaging dependency, right? All these are the different dependencies which we require. I'll also need to add some configurations because to connect to the SQS topic, I need some credentials, right? So for that, what I did is, so I added some AWS credentials. So these are the credentials which are specific for this user which we created here. So the app user, whatever we created, I'm just going to use this from my application. And these are my access key and secret key. Obviously, in production, you can leverage STS for assuming role and then trying out. But just for the demo purpose, I'm just going to use a access key and secret key to connect to SQS. So that's what I'm doing here. So this app user has these as the access key and secret key. I'm also adding some more properties. For example, I'm hard coding my region as US East 2 because this particular app is going to run on US East 2. So if you see here, this is US East 2. So if you want to dynamically set that variable from outside the application, you can definitely do that. I'm also disabling the CloudFormation stack because this application will come up and then check if the stack was created automatically. So I'm just disabling it because I'm manually deploying the application. I think my tests are creating some issue. Let me remove the test package for now. Don't do that in production. So the build is successful and we are good. What I'm going to do now is open my terminal inside IntelliJ itself, and I'm going to copy this AWS S3 and I'm going to copy my application, which is, what is my jar name? My jar will be like Spring Cloud AWS example. This I'm going to copy it into my S3 bucket, and the bucket name is, let me go to the console and then see what is my bucket name. So I created a bucket earlier, I think yesterday. So let's use the same bucket. I don't want to create a new bucket. So there is a bucket called TP code bucket. So I can leverage the same bucket. So I'm going to use the same bucket, TP code bucket. If you don't have a bucket created, you can definitely do that. I'm going to call this application as Spring Cloud AWS.jar. So this will copy my application from my local machine, which is under target folder, which is this file. It'll copy that into the S3 bucket. So let me copy this. And this is the command AWS S3 CP. So right now my package size is 28 MB and this is just copying the image now into the S3 bucket. Meanwhile, let's go back to the terminal and you can see that Java installation got completed. Let's do a Java version, Java hyphen version. So I have Java 11 installed, which is OpenJDK version. So I'm good with that. So I'm currently inside the home slash EC2 users. Let me go to the root. So I'm going to create a folder called app, mkdir app. So inside app is where I'm going to deploy my jar. So so right now it's empty. So let's now do a AWS S3 ls. So we can see the bucket from here as well. So you can see that there are two buckets. So let's check if the upload got completed. Yep, the upload got completed. Now we can download the file, right? So I'm just going to say S3 copy and we're going to give the reverse pp code bucket slash spring cloud aws.jar, and I'm just going to copy it to my local directory. So just got downloaded. I'm just going to give some permission 3755 spring. Done. Now my jar is available for me. I have done, let me go back to the architecture. So my application is now deployed within the EC2 instance. I have code for both publishing and also for receiving it. I have also assigned my role with the permissions for SQS topic. I also created an SQS topic. I think that's it, right? I mean, we are all set. Let's go to the EC2 instance. So I'm going to run the application. So I can do Java jar spring cloud.jar. So this should bring up my application. Right now I'm using the default profile. Everything is default. So let's create it. So the application is up. I need to hit the endpoint, which is this users, right? So what I did is I did not expose any load balancing for this particular EC2 instance, right? In order to do that, again, I need to create a classic ELB and things like that. I don't want to make things complicated for this example or the demo, right? So I'm going to create another um, terminal window. So I'm going to log into the same EC2 instance, and so I'm logged into the EC2 instance from here as well. Let me do a clear. So my application is running in this terminal, which is connected to the same EC2 instance. I'm just connected to the same one here as well. I'm going to do a curl. So let me do a curl for the endpoint HTTP colon localhost, because this is inside the EC2, right? So I'm going to hit the post endpoint from the EC2 instance itself. So the application is running in 8080. So I'll just say localhost 8080, and my endpoint is user. I'm going to use the response body, which I'm going to enclose within single quotes, and I'm going to pass name, which I'm just going to say Ryan. I'll also pass the ID, which I will say 1 for now. I'll say salary. For now, I'll say 12,000. Done. I'll just enclose this with the single brace so that it's done. So this is the message which I'm going to push, right? This is the user I'm going to create, and I want to send the header. The header defines what kind of message type we are sending, right? So I'm going to say content type as application slash JSON. So this is what we are sending. That's it, right? And also I'll say what type of message it is. It's a post message, right? So I'll just say -x to denote what type of message we are sending. This is a post, so I'll just say post. That's it. So let me hit the enter, and notice that in the top we already got the message saying creating user, sending user to SQS, and you can see that after few seconds we received the message also saying it is Ryan. Actually, I should have printed the whole user object, but at least we got the message, right? So looks like we sent the message from the application to the queue, and from the queue we received it. Because if you look at the code, we had separate service for receiver, which came via this. For example, here we added this message here, and we also had a separate code for sending the message, which is sending user to SQS here. So looks like our code worked. So with Spring Cloud AWS, the advantage what we are getting here is we did not do much. We just added annotations to connect to the SQS listeners, and we configured the credentials using the cloud AWS credentials using the access key, right? Obviously you can leverage STS for assuming roles and then doing it without any access key kind of a use case. You can have temporary tokens and using the STS, and then you can connect it. That's the best way, but I'm just showing a demo with the access key here. So that's done. Now the next step is to integrate the cache, right? So in order to do that, obviously we need to add some more code. In order to integrate Redis into the code, we need to add some dependencies, right? So I'm going to add some dependencies. So I've already preloaded my Redis dependency. So I'm adding Spring Data Redis for the same version. I'm excluding the IO-letuse jar, and I'm adding the Redis library. So Redis is one library using which you can connect to the Redis from Java. I'm also adding the ElastiCache jar so that we can leverage the ElastiCache API, right? So that's how it's going to integrate and then call ElastiCache. So those are the Java dependencies which we require. There are some properties which we need to add. For example, I'm just going to say AWS Redis config. These are the three different properties which I need to add. The cache type is Redis. I need to add the host name here. In order to add the host name, I need to create a Redis cluster. So let's create the Redis cluster, because Redis cluster creation takes a bit longer. So I'll just say ElastiCache. Let me go to ElastiCache. I will show you. So inside ElastiCache, there are two implementations of ElastiCache. One is the memcached, one is the Redis. So I'm going to use the Redis here as an example. You can also leverage memcached if you want. So let me create a new cache. So I'm going to call this particular cache as user cache, right? Because this is where I'm storing the user. I'm going to call this as user cache. User cache is the name of the cache which I'm going to use. I'm just going to leave everything as default. You can change the port number, you can change the engine version, default Redis version. You can also change the instance type, right? Right now I'm using a 13 GB machine for my instance, so let it be there. I'm okay, and I'm also having two replicas, right? So there will be three instances now, one master and two replicas. I will also configure it as a multi-easy. That's it, right? And I don't want to have any backup. I am going to disable it. So that's that. There is something called security group. If you see here, by default it's added a security group, right? It's using the default security group. Why security group? Because in order to access the Redis cache, you need to have some permission again, right? So I need to configure my EC2 instance to have access to this particular security group. So I'll show that in a bit, but this is the security group it is using. That's it. I don't want anything else. I'll just say create. So let this create, and once the cache gets created, it will give us some primary endpoint, and that is the endpoint which we'll be adding as a host here. So let's not add that here right now, but let's go and add some code. So now the change which we need to do to the application is when we receive the message, we need to process the message into the cache, right? So here we have the data here, but I need to cache this message. Now how do I cache this message, right? So that's where I am going to integrate into the Redis repository. So I'm going to create a Redis repository using the usual Spring repository implementation or the way of creating it, right? So I'm going to inject a repository called user repository. So right now it doesn't exist, so I'm just going to create it. All right, so this is an interface, so I'm just going to create a interface. I'll just create a new package called repository. I'll also annotate it with, and it's an interface, so I don't want to annotate it with anything. So I'll also say user repository interface. I already preloaded my code with all those examples, so I'm just going to, that's it. So we have multiple methods: save, find all, find by, update, delete. These are the general methods which we have, the CRUD operations which we can do in the database. Usually we use the repository to connect to a database. Here we are going to use it to connect to the Redis cache. So this is the interface which I've created. Now I need to implement this interface, right? So I'm just going to create an implementation of this particular interface, and I'm going to implement all the methods. Obviously I have loaded all these into my IntelliJ already, so I'm just going to call this as implementation. So I've already written the code for all the methods which we just saw here. So let me remove all the unnecessary package. My Redis dependencies are not getting detected because I did not import, so I just imported my Maven settings. So this is just now fine. Let me minimize this and minimize this also, and let's go in the full view mode so we can understand this file better. So if you see here, this is the same example which I had used in my Spring Data Redis video. Nothing fancy here. I just created an implementation of the user repository, but there are two things we are doing here. One is called the hash operations, using which we can cache our data into the Redis cache, which integrates it with the Redis template. So Redis template is the alternative for our REST template or the queue messaging template which we saw earlier, like few minutes back, right? So Redis template is what is going to insert the data, and I'm injecting that Redis template into the user repository implementation, and that's what we are doing here. As a part of save, I'm just putting the data into the hash operations using the cache name. So the cache name here denotes user cache, which is what we created here. This is the one. So it's going to enter data into the user cache with the ID. So ID is going to be my unique key, because in the user I am just using ID as my unique value. So it could be the employee ID, right? So that's how I'm putting the data and pushing the whole user data into it. So as a part of save method, we'll be putting the data into the cache. Find all will retrieve all the method data from the cache. Find by ID, using which we can retrieve a specific ID. Update will save the same, right? I mean, obviously it's going to call the save, it's going to update the same. Delete is going to remove the cache for that particular ID, and that's what we have done here. So this is what is the core for integrating with the Redis instance. So done, right? I mean, let's go back to the receiver. So in the receiver, I'm just going to auto wire this. Once I have auto wired, I'm just going to leverage it here. So I'll just say user repository dot save, because I'm going to save this message, right? So I'll just say saved message in cache. That's it. So I've just saved the message, whatever we received into the cache using the user repository, and I'm just adding a message. That's it. So we can process the message directly. However, in order to configure this whole thing, right? I mean, the whole Redis package integration, we have to create some configurations. So I'm going to create some Spring auto configuration. By default, Spring can do it, but I'm going to plug in my Elastic instance, right? I'm going to plug in my Redis instance. So I'm just going to add some configurations, but you can try without the configuration. I did not try without the configuration, but you can definitely try without it as well. So I'll just call it as Redis config. So I've already loaded that into my template. That's why it got auto generated, and I'm just importing the right class. That's it here. So what I have done here is I've added an annotation for configuration, which will be the auto configuration for Spring Boot. I've enabled the Elastic Cache with the cluster configuration for the cache name as user cache. I've also got the values for the Redis host and the port number, which we have here. All these will be injected as values here. Those two will be used to create a Redis standalone configuration using Redis factory, right? This factory will now be injected into the Redis template, right? And that's what I'm doing here. And the same Redis template will be injected into and the same factory will be injected into my cache manager if I want to retrieve it via cache manager. I'm not going to use the cache manager directly here, but I just added as a configuration. You can just in fact ignore the whole file and then use the property to load it, but I don't know, for some reason it did not work for me initially, so I did not try that. But do let me know without the configuration if it works or not. I don't want to just do it without the configuration and then fail in the video. So I'm just adding it as a configuration by default, but Spring does that all these under the hood anyway. So let's come back to the receiver part. So that's it, right? We have saved the message. Now we need to figure out a way to show this to the user, right? So that we can retrieve the message, right? This is the one. So we need to create a new endpoint called get, using which we can retrieve the data from the cache. So let's go to the, here we have post mappings, right? Let's add some get. So let me add a get mapping. I'm going to call this as I need to send the user message by ID. So I'll add it as a path parameter. So the path parameter will be called ID. So when you pass the ID, you can get the message. So I'll just say integer ID. So when you pass the ID, I'm going to query the repository by the ID. So I don't want to query the repository directly. So I'm going to create a service. I'm going to create a user or Redis service. In fact, even in the previous service, I should have directly done it. But since I can directly call a repository from a service, I didn't do it. But let's create a service. So that's it. So in the Redis service, I'm going to call get by ID. I'll pass the ID. And I need a user to be returned. So I'm going to create a method. By default, it's going to add all these things. Here I'm going to inject my user repository. So using the user repository dot find by ID, I'm going to query the ID and I'm just going to return it. That's it. So we have done the method for get by ID. If somebody wants by all, we can do that as well. Let's do all also, right? I mean, let's go to here. I want to here I think we need to return it, right? So let's return this. I want to say all. So if somebody says all user slash all, we should return everything. So let's use the Redis service for it now. Again, let me create the method, and this should now return user repository dot find all. So this should now return everything. So the find all returns a different okay, type map. So let's return this back. So let's do the same. That's it. So I'm doing a get and get all. That's it, right? I mean, we can directly use the Redis service. In fact, let's go to the SQS receiver, and instead of auto wiring the repository here, let's do the other way around. Redis service, I'm doing the same thing. Let's move this to the done. Now we can get rid of the repository and we can move everything to the service. So that's it. I moved all the repository injection to this particular user repository service, right, which is based on the Redis. So I'm having a Redis service using which I'm interacting with the repository. At least it looks decent right now. That's it. So what else do I need? I've added okay, no, we need the host name, right, in order to connect to the cache. So the cache got created, the status of the cache is available. So let's go to the user cache, and there is this endpoint here. This is the endpoint which we need to connect to. And if I go to the cache, you can see two different replicas. If you remember, we created a replica count as 2, right? And these are the two different replicas. So data will be like present in the 1, and then it will be replicated to 2 and 3, right? So there are 3 instances running right now. So let's go here, paste the host name. We don't need the port. Done. So this is the host with which we are going to connect to from the EC2 instance. So let's package this application. Obviously, we need to have the role with the necessary permissions. If you remember, we created the app user role, and that app user role has ElastiCache full access, right? Also, if you remember, I was mentioning about the security group, right? The security group which the ElastiCache uses, right? Let's go to the EC2 instance security group. And if you go to the ElastiCache, we had a specific, if you go to settings, I think we should be able to see, no, in the description, let's check. Yep, in the description there is this security group called as GCE04, right? Let's go to the same. If you see this particular security group, I have configured it to have connections to be accessible from another security group. This security group is nothing but the EC2 instance security group. So EC2 instance would have got created with a security group, and from our EC2 instance we need to connect to our ElastiCache, right? And how do we do it? Obviously you can configure the security group to have access to, right? That's another way of accessing or giving authentication to the ElastiCache instance. So I've done that. So that is why we should be able to access it, right? I mean, initially you will have to configure it. I did it as a part of my previous demo, so I'm not repeating it again, or else it will be too much. So I'm just making a note, so you can just do it yourself. That's it. So my package is done, all my configurations are done. I think what else is pending? That's it, I guess. So let's go to the terminal and push the artifact. Let me push the artifact to S3 bucket. Meanwhile, let me go to the terminal window. I think my SSH got timed out. So let's reconnect to both the terminals from my local. And let me go to user/app. So if the upload is completed, yes, now if you see the jar size is like huge, 33.9 MB, right? That's because we added Redis as a part of our new package, right? So let's go here and see if our application is still running. The application went down, which is a good thing. Now I need to copy my S3 content into here, right? Let's do here. Yeah, so I'm copying from the S3 bucket. So the command is again AWS S3 copy into the current directory. So the file got pushed here. I think I can do it, but let me do a chmod 755 and spring. That's it. So I'm going to run this application. So now the changes are with ElastiCache as well. So this should now connect to our ElastiCache instance. Also, I'll show you by stopping the instance, restarting, so that we know the data is coming from the cache and not within the application. We are not faking it, right? So let's do that. From here, I'm going to do a curl, right? Let's do the curl. So I'm going to hit the same endpoint we had, which is the post endpoint, using which I'm going to create a user called Ryan with the ID as 1, salary as 12,000, right? Let's hit that. So the message is sent to the SQS topic. It should get received in 5 seconds. I think it should be now. Yep, we got the message. Looks like there is a socket timeout. If you notice that, right? I think this could be because my EC2 instance doesn't have um, the connection to the security group. I think now I get it. Let's go to the EC2 console. Let's look at what is a security group. I think maybe my EC2 instance had a different security group. That is why we are not able to connect to. So let's look at which is my instance. Okay, this is launch time today. This is the EC2 instance. Let's look at the security group of my instance. Security. Okay, so the instance security group is different. Launch wizard 2. I think this is the different security group compared to the access which we have given here. Let's go to the settings. Sorry, description. I think this is a separate group, right? Let's open another instance. Let me go to security group. Okay, there are two security groups now, right? I mean, that's the ring. The launch wizard 2 is my EC2 instance security group. So I need to add my EC2 instance into this. Like I was mentioning earlier, I should have added it, but yeah, let's add it. I'm just saying get all the traffic for now, and I need to install. So I need to give these launch wizard 2 here. That's it. So this should add my EC2 instance to have access to the Elastic Cache instance. Let's restart the application, or let's retry pushing the message. I don't know if that will work. I've never tried it. I heard security should work. I think now it's worked, right? It says saved message in the cache. Now how do I verify it? We need to do a curl. That's when we know it's going to be stored, right? Did I add any message? Okay, I think I did not add any log statement, but I think we can check using id equal to 1 hyphen x get. So let's do that. Okay, the path user slash id equal to 1 doesn't work, right? I mean, what does it say? We got a null pointer because did we not inject? Let's go to the controller. Oh, looks like I did not auto wire my service. That's the problem. Okay, so that's a good thing. Now we are going to redeploy the application, and I'm not going to create the user again, but let's see if the user is retrieved from the cache or not. Because if I restart my application, obviously if the data was within the application, it would have got deleted. Now at least we know that it's going to be coming from the cache. So it was just a blind mistake. I did not add out of wired here. So let's quickly deploy the application. So I've restarted my application after downloading the new package from the S3 bucket. Hopefully this should now solve the issue which we got. It was a null pointer exception, a classic null pointer. So let's do a get now. At least we should get, yeah, I think we got the message. See this, right? We got the Ryan message. Let me do a clear. So see that we got the Ryan ID, right? Let me post one more message, right? Just to have a clear idea. Let's update the salary of Ryan to 10,000, right? I'll query, still it is showing 12,000, still it is showing 12. Now you see that it got updated to 10,000. So my cache is getting updated, right? After it is pushed. Now let me add one more user, right? Just to have some more users. So we can do a find all and then we can get two different users, right? I'll just do create two. I'll just say Chris. So Chris has 1 lakh. Okay. So message got sent. It should get received in the other queue. Yep, and it got saved in the cache. Now let's do a all, right? I mean, if you look at it, I had user slash all endpoint, which should return all the, yep, I can see that. For the ID2, this is my data. For ID1, this is my data. So looks like my cache works fine. Let me try stopping this application and then restarting, right? That way we know the cache works, right? Let's stop this particular application. Hopefully this got killed. If not, I will forcefully kill it. Okay, it did not get killed by default. So I've killed the application, and let me restart the application just to make sure. Let's hit the endpoint again just to show it failed. Connection refused, application is still not up. I'm just waiting. Now you can see that the data is coming from the cache. So that's how we know it connects to the ElastiCache instance, and then it's retrieving the data. So I hope you guys understood how we did it as a part of Spring Cloud with the Spring Cloud AWS dependencies, right? I'll just summarize what we did. Initially, we saw the architecture diagram. We created a EC2 instance. We created a Spring Boot application with Spring Cloud AWS as the dependency. We created an endpoint called user controller. As a part of it, we created a user message using the post mapping. We created a SQS sender using which we were sending the message. We created a queue messaging template using which we converted and sent the message to the queue. We also created a receiver endpoint, receiver service, using which we annotated the SQS listener, and then we retrieved it from the same queue, and then we logged it. Later on, we integrated that with a Redis repository, which we implemented here using the Redis template and hash operations here. We created multiple methods so that we could query the Elastic cache. We integrated that with the receiver to save the message, and from the user controller, we exposed multiple endpoints so that we could retrieve the data. We created also a Redis service using which we connected to the repository. We also added some configuration details so that we could create the factories and the beans which Spring Boot can use to connect to the Redis instance. We added those properties in the application.properties. As always, this particular code will be available in the GitHub for you for reference. I will remove the access keys. I will disable them once the video goes live. I hope this particular video was helpful. As always, if you like the video, go ahead and like it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to it. Meet you again in the next video. Thank you very much.